My name is Ruth Alvarez, and I'm 63 years old. I've lived through things most people only see in movies, the kind of pain that changes you, reshapes you into someone you never thought you'd become. I've buried a husband, raised 3 children alone, and learned that sometimes the quietest people make the loudest impact when they finally decide to act. People always told me I was too soft, too gentle. My mother used to say I'd let people walk all over me if I wasn't careful. And maybe she was right for a long time. I was the woman who kept the peace, who swallowed her words, who smiled even when my heart was breaking. I thought that's what good women did. We endured. We sacrificed. We stayed silent. But there's a difference between being kind and being a coward. And it took me 58 years to learn where that line was drawn. I want to tell you about a moment that changed everything. A Tuesday afternoon in November 2020, when I walked into my daughter's house and saw something that made my blood run cold. My granddaughter Emily, sweet, beautiful Emily, sitting on a kitchen chair, tears streaming down her face, as her mother stood behind her with electric clippers in her hand. The sound of that buzzer still haunts me, and the pile of golden curls on the floor like fallen autumn leaves, each one a piece of my granddaughter's dignity being stripped away. I stood there. I watched. I said nothing. But silence doesn't always mean acceptance. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes silence is the moment before the storm. What I did in the 48 hours after that moment would shock everyone who thought they knew me. The woman who never made waves. The woman who always kept family business private. The woman who believed blood was thicker than water, no matter what. I proved them all wrong. If you've ever felt powerless, if you've ever watched someone you love being hurt and didn't know what to do, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and doing what's right, this story is for you. Stay with me. Because what happened next will show you that it's never too late to find your voice. It's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. And if this story touches you, if it makes you think about your own life, your own choices, please share it. Subscribe to hear more stories like this. Because sometimes the most ordinary people have the most extraordinary strength inside them. They just need the right moment to let it out. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was born in 1962 in San Antonio, Texas, on a scorching July afternoon when the temperature hit 104 degrees. My mother said I came into the world quietly, no dramatic entrance, no screaming or fussing, just a soft whimper, and then calm. You were always easy, she'd tell me later, and I was never sure if that was a compliment or an accusation. My father worked construction, and my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in Alamo Heights. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We lived in a small house on the west side, where the streets were dusty and the neighbors knew everyone's business. I had 2 older brothers, Miguel and Carlos, who treated me like their personal doll when they weren't ignoring me completely. Growing up in the 60s and 70s in San Antonio meant growing up between 2 worlds. At home, we spoke Spanish, ate my grandmother's tamales, and celebrated every Saint's Day like it was Christmas. At school, I was expected to be American, speak English perfectly, forget where I came from, blend in. I learned early how to be 2 different people, how to shape myself to fit whatever space I was in. My mother was the strong one in our family. My father was kind but weak. He drank too much, worked too hard, and died too young. Heart attack at 47, leaving my mother with 3 teenagers and a mortgage she could barely afford. I was 15 when we buried him. I remember standing at his grave, watching my mother's face. She didn't cry. She just looked tired. So tired. That's when I learned what strength looked like. It looked like my mother going to work the day after the funeral, It looked like her taking a second job at a laundromat. It looked like her never complaining, never breaking down, never asking for help. I wanted to be like her. I wanted to be strong. But I confused strength with silence. I thought being tough meant never showing pain. I thought being a good daughter, and later a good wife and mother, meant absorbing everyone else's problems and never creating any of my own. School was my escape. I loved reading. I'd spend hours at the library, losing myself in stories about people whose lives were nothing like mine. I was a good student, not brilliant, but steady. My teachers liked me because I was quiet and obedient. I never caused trouble. I never asked for too much attention. When I was 17, I met Daniel Alvarez at a church dance. He was 20, working at his uncle's auto shop with dark eyes and a smile that made me forget my own name. He was confident where I was shy. He was loud where I was quiet. He filled up all the empty spaces in my life, and I fell in love with him the way teenage girls do, completely, desperately, without any understanding of what love actually requires. We got married 3 months after I graduated high school. I was 18 years old. My mother cried at the wedding, and I thought it was because she was happy for me. Years later, I realized she was crying because she knew I was making a mistake. Not because Daniel was a bad man. He wasn't. But because I was too young, too unformed, too eager to disappear into someone else's life instead of building my own. But I didn't know that then. I thought I was starting my adventure. I thought I was beginning my happily ever after. I had no idea that life doesn't work that way. That marriage is work. That love isn't enough when you don't know who you are. That the hardest battles aren't against the world outside. They're against the people closest to you, and sometimes against yourself. The first few years of marriage were like living in a dream where everything looks perfect from the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. Daniel and I moved into a small apartment near his work. I got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. We went to church on Sundays, had dinner with his family every week, and pretended we had it all figured out. But we were children playing house. Daniel worked long hours and came home exhausted, wanting only to eat, watch TV, and sleep. I kept the apartment spotless, cooked elaborate meals, and waited for him to notice. He rarely did. We'd go days barely speaking beyond how was work and what's for dinner. I got pregnant with our first child when I was 19. Jessica arrived in 1982, a beautiful baby girl with Daniel's dark eyes and my quiet temperament. Holding her for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. This was what I was meant for. This was my purpose. Not the marriage that was already showing cracks, but this tiny person who needed me completely. Being a mother filled all the empty spaces that Daniel had once occupied. I poured everything into Jessica, every ounce of love, attention, and energy I had. Daniel seemed relieved to take a back seat. He loved his daughter, but he loved her in the way men of his generation did, from a distance, as a provider, but not a caretaker. Then came Michael in 1984, and suddenly I had 2 babies under 3 years old. The apartment felt too small. Money was always tight. Daniel started working even longer hours, taking extra shifts to pay the bills. I was alone most days, trapped in a cycle of diapers, feedings, and exhaustion so deep I sometimes forgot what it felt like to be fully awake. My mother helped when she could, but she was getting older, and her health wasn't great. My brothers had moved away, Miguel to Houston, Carlos to Dallas. I had friends from church, but they all seemed to have their lives together in ways I didn't. Their marriages looked happy. Their children were well behaved. Their houses were clean and organized. I smiled and pretended I was fine, that I wasn't drowning. Then in 1987, I got pregnant again. This one was a surprise. Daniel. And I barely had enough money for 2 children, and now there would be 3. I cried when I saw the positive test. Not tears of joy, but tears of overwhelm. How would I manage? How would we afford this? But when Melissa was born in 1988, something in me hardened into determination. This sweet baby girl with her bright eyes and loud personality, she deserved better than a mother who was just surviving. They all did. I started to change, slowly. I went back to work part-time when Melissa turned 1, leaving the kids with my mother during the day. The extra money helped, but more than that, it gave me a piece of my identity back. I wasn't just Daniel's wife or Jessica, Michael, and Melissa's mother. I was Ruth, the woman who could solve problems, organize schedules, and manage a busy office. Daniel didn't like it. He wanted a traditional wife, someone who stayed home and had dinner ready when he walked through the door. We fought about it, our first real fights. I discovered I had a voice, and once I started using it, I couldn't stop. But I was still learning. I was still trying to balance everyone's needs against my own. I was still choosing peace over confrontation more often than not. I told myself I was being wise, being mature. Really, I was still afraid. Afraid of being too much. Afraid of being difficult. Afraid that if I pushed too hard, everything would fall apart. And maybe I was right to be afraid. Because life has a way of falling apart anyway, whether you're careful or not. Looking back now, I see that those years were preparing me. Every compromise, every swallowed word, every moment I chose silence, they were building something inside me. Not weakness like I thought, but pressure. Pressure that would one day need to be released. The 90s were the years we finally found our rhythm. Daniel got promoted to manager at the auto shop, which meant better pay and more stable hours. I worked my way up to office manager at the dental practice. The kids were in school, Jessica in middle school, Michael in elementary, and Melissa starting kindergarten. We moved into a small house with a backyard where the kids could play. From the outside, we looked like we'd made it. The American dream, Latino style. But inside our house, the distance between Daniel and me kept growing. We were partners in logistics, coordinating schedules, paying bills, managing children, but we'd stopped being partners in anything that mattered. We slept in the same bed, but might as well have been strangers. I told myself it was normal, that this was what marriage became after the romance faded. My mother never seemed particularly close to my father either. None of the couples at church looked passionately in love. This was just life. You made your choice, and you lived with it. Jessica was my challenge during those years. She hit puberty and became a stranger overnight, moody, secretive, angry at everything I said or did. We fought constantly. I was too strict, too old-fashioned, too much. She wanted freedom I wasn't ready to give. She tested every boundary, broke every rule. I see now that she was fighting for her own identity the way I never did at her age. But then, I just felt like I was failing. Every argument ended with her screaming, "I hate you," and slamming her door. Daniel would tell me to lighten up, that I was being too hard on her. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one doing the actual parenting. Michael was my easy child. Sweet, quiet, sensitive. He loved art and music, spent hours drawing in his sketchbooks. He never caused trouble, never talked back. Sometimes I worried he was too much like me, too willing to disappear, to avoid conflict. But mostly I was grateful to have one child I didn't have to fight with. And Melissa, wild, funny, stubborn Melissa, was my surprise joy. She had more personality than the rest of us combined. She could make me laugh even on my hardest days. She was fearless in ways I'd never been. Sometimes watching her, I'd feel a mix of admiration and envy. What would my life have been like if I'd had her confidence at her age? In 1999, everything changed. Daniel was working late one Thursday night in September. I was helping Melissa with her homework when the phone rang. It was the hospital. There'd been an accident at the shop. A car had fallen off a lift. Daniel was in surgery. I remember the drive to the hospital like it happened to someone else. My hands shaking on the steering wheel. My mother in the passenger seat, praying in Spanish. The kids in the back, scared and quiet. He survived. Broken ribs, collapsed lung, shattered pelvis. 3 months of recovery. He could have died, the doctors said. He was lucky. But something died anyway. Daniel came home from the hospital different, angry, depressed, in constant pain. The man who'd worked his whole life suddenly couldn't work. The provider who defined himself by taking care of his family had to be taken care of. It broke something in him. He was difficult during his recovery. Mean sometimes. He'd snap at the kids, criticize everything I did. I told myself it was the pain, the frustration, that he'd get better once he healed. He did heal, physically. Went back to work after 4 months. But the darkness didn't leave. He started drinking more. Not enough to be a drunk, but enough that I noticed. Enough that I worried. I should have insisted he get help. I should have demanded we go to counseling. But I was still the girl who kept the peace, who didn't make waves. I accommodated. I adjusted. I told myself things would get better on their own. That's what I regret most about those years. Not the fighting, not the distance, but the silence. All the conversations we never had. All the help we never asked for. All the ways we slowly stopped being partners and became just two people living separate lives under the same roof. The year 2010 started like any other. Jessica was 28, married to a man named Frank who I never quite warmed to, but she seemed happy. Michael was 26, living in Austin, working as a graphic designer. Melissa was 22, finishing college, still living at home. Daniel and I were 48 and 47, respectively. Not old, but not young anymore either. We'd settled into a comfortable distance. Not happy, but not miserable. Just existing. We had separate routines, separate interests. We'd learned how to live together without really being together. I thought that's how we'd continue until retirement, maybe grandchildren, growing old in our small house with its familiar rhythms. Then came March 7th, a Sunday. Daniel had been complaining about indigestion all weekend. I'd told him to take some Tums, maybe see a doctor if it didn't get better. He'd brush me off like he always did. He was in the garage, working on his truck. I was in the kitchen, making lunch. I heard a crash, the sound of tools hitting concrete. I ran outside. He was on the ground, eyes open, not breathing. I screamed for Melissa, called 911, started CPR like they teach you, even though I'd never actually had to do it before. Pressed on his chest, breathed into his mouth. Pressed and breathed and pressed and breathed until the paramedics arrived and gently pulled me away. They worked on him for 40 minutes. In our driveway, in front of our neighbors, in front of our daughter. I knew before they told me. I could see it in their faces. But I stood there anyway, waiting for the words that would change everything. I'm sorry. We did everything we could. Massive heart attack. He was dead before he hit the ground. Nothing anyone could have done. The next few weeks were a blur. Planning a funeral, dealing with insurance, relatives coming and going, people bringing casseroles and saying, "I'm so sorry for your loss," like those words meant anything. Jessica fell apart. She'd always been Daddy's girl, and losing him broke something in her. Michael came home from Austin and barely left his old bedroom. Melissa tried to be strong, to take care of me, but I could see the fear in her eyes. If this could happen to her father, suddenly and without warning, what else could she lose? I moved through those days like a ghost, made decisions, signed papers, thanked people for coming, said all the right things. But inside, I was numb. It wasn't until a month after the funeral, when everyone had gone back to their lives and I was alone in the house, that it hit me. I sat on our bed, my bed now, and felt the weight of 30 years of marriage crash down on me. And I realized something that shocked me. I wasn't just sad. I was angry. Angry that he'd left me like this. Angry that we'd wasted so many years being distant instead of close. Angry that we'd never fixed what was broken. Angry that I'd never insisted we try. Angry at him for dying. Angry at myself for caring that he did. Grief, I learned, is complicated. It's not just sadness. It's regret and guilt and anger and relief all tangled together in a knot you can't untie. The financial situation was worse than I'd thought. Daniel had some life insurance, but not much. The house still had a mortgage. There were medical bills from his accident years before that we'd been slowly paying off. I had my job at the dental office, but it wasn't enough to maintain everything on my own. I had to make decisions. Sell the house. Downsize. Ask the kids for help. I'd spent my whole adult life being taken care of, at least financially. Now, at 47, I had to figure out how to take care of myself. I sold the house, moved into a small apartment. Melissa moved with me. She'd just graduated and was looking for her first real job. Jessica offered to let me stay with her and Frank, but I said no. I needed to prove to myself that I could do this, that I could stand on my own. Those months after Daniel died were the hardest of my life, but they were also the most important, because for the first time, I had no choice but to figure out who Ruth Alvarez was when she wasn't someone's wife, when she wasn't defined by her marriage. I had to become myself. Finally, the first year of widowhood was like learning to walk again after an accident. Everything familiar was gone. I had to relearn how to be in the world as just Ruth, not Ruth and Daniel. Simple things were hard. Eating dinner alone. Watching TV with no one to discuss it with. Sleeping in a bed that felt too big. Going to church and sitting by myself instead of with my husband. People treated me differently, with pity, with careful kindness, like I might break if they said the wrong thing. But slowly, day by day, I adapted. I made new routines, started taking morning walks, joined a book club at the library, began cooking meals I liked instead of meals Daniel preferred. I painted my apartment walls colors he would have hated. I bought plants and filled every windowsill with green, growing things. Melissa was good company during that time. She got a job as a teacher at an elementary school and threw herself into her work with the same intensity she brought to everything. Watching her with her students, I saw hints of the mother she might become someday. She was firm but loving, patient but no nonsense. She'd learned that from me. I realized the good parts of my parenting, the parts I'd gotten right. Jessica was struggling. Her marriage to Frank was rocky. They fought constantly about money, about his drinking, about when to have kids. She'd call me crying, and I'd listen, offer advice she rarely took. She reminded me so much of my younger self, stuck in a marriage that wasn't working, too afraid to leave, too proud to admit things were wrong. In 2012, she got pregnant. Emily was born in January 2013, a cold winter morning when the world felt new and full of possibility. I held my first grandchild and felt something shift in my chest. A new kind of love, fierce and immediate. This tiny person who had my eyes and Jessica's nose and Daniel's dark hair. I became the kind of grandmother I'd wanted to be. Involved but not overbearing, helpful but not intrusive. I babysat when Jessica needed a break. I showed up for every milestone. I loved that little girl with an intensity that surprised me. But I also saw things that worried me. Frank was distant with Emily, seemed annoyed by her crying, her needs. Jessica was exhausted all the time, stressed, snapping at everyone. Their arguments got worse after Emily was born. I'd hear them fighting when I came over to help, harsh whispers behind closed doors. I wanted to say something, to sit Jessica down and ask if she was okay, if she was happy, if she needed help. But I didn't, because that was still my pattern. Stay quiet, don't interfere, hope things work out on their own. Michael came home for Thanksgiving in 2014 and brought a surprise, a boyfriend named Tyler. They'd been together for 2 years. He'd been afraid to tell me, afraid I'd reject him, judge him. I held my son and cried, apologized for making him feel like he had to hide who he was, told him I loved him no matter what, welcomed Tyler into our family with open arms. That should have been a moment of pure joy, and it was. But it was also tinged with sadness, because I thought about Daniel and how he would have reacted. He would have struggled with it. I knew. His traditional Catholic upbringing, his machismo, his expectations for his son. Maybe it was better he wasn't here to make Michael's life harder. That thought made me feel guilty and relieved at the same time. By 2015, I'd been a widow for 5 years. I was 53 years old. I'd survived the worst thing I could imagine. I'd built a new life from the ruins of my old one. I was proud of myself in ways I'd never been before. But I was also tired. Tired of always being strong. Tired of watching my children struggle and not knowing how to help. Tired of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't know it then, but I was standing at another crossroads. Another moment when life would demand I choose between the person I'd always been and the person I needed to become. The thing about survival is that it changes you. Every hard thing you live through leaves a mark, adds a layer, makes you tougher, yes, but also makes you more aware of what matters. More protective of the people and things you love. More willing to fight when you need to. Jessica's marriage finally fell apart in 2016. Frank moved out after one fight, too many. They tried counseling, but he barely showed up, and when he did, he was defensive, hostile. The divorce was finalized by the end of the year. Jessica got custody of Emily, who was 3 by then, and Frank got weekend visitation. At first, I thought the divorce might be good for Jessica. She'd be free of a man who didn't treat her well, who didn't pull his weight, who made her constantly anxious and unhappy. Maybe she'd flourish on her own the way I had. But divorce hit her differently than widowhood hit me. She became bitter, angry at the world. She quit her job, said she needed to focus on Emily, started living off child support and sporadic work, moved into a cheaper apartment in a rougher neighborhood, and she changed as a mother. The exhausted but loving woman I'd seen when Emily was a baby became someone harder, more critical, more controlling. She had rules for everything: how Emily could dress, how she could wear her hair, what she could eat, what she could watch on TV. Emily couldn't play at other kids' houses, couldn't have friends over, couldn't make noise or mess or mistakes. I told myself Jessica was just stressed. Single motherhood is hard. She was doing her best. These were just growing pains. They'd figure it out. But Emily started to change too. The bright, bubbly little girl became quieter, more careful. She'd look to her mother before she spoke, before she moved, like she was constantly checking if she was allowed to exist. When she came to my apartment, she'd relax a little, but never completely, like she was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I tried to talk to Jessica about it, gently. Maybe you're being a little too strict. Emily seems anxious lately. Have you thought about family counseling? Jessica would shut down. I'm her mother. I know what's best for her. You don't understand how hard this is. If you can't support me, then just stay out of it. So I stayed out of it. Because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. Melissa was thriving in contrast. She'd been promoted to assistant principal at her school. Started dating a wonderful man named David. They got engaged in 2018. I helped plan the wedding, throwing myself into the joy of it. Here was one thing going right. The wedding was beautiful. Emily was the flower girl. And for that one day, she seemed light again. She giggled and danced and ate cake until she was sick. Jessica even seemed happy, or at least less miserable than usual. But then life went back to normal. Jessica's bitterness grew. She was jealous of Melissa's happiness, resentful that things seemed easy for her sister when they were so hard for her. She started pulling away from family gatherings, making excuses why she and Emily couldn't come to Sunday dinners or holidays. I'd see Emily less and less. When I did see her, the change was stark. She was 7, 8, 9 years old and seemed to shrink into herself more each year. She barely spoke unless spoken to. She flinched when her mother raised her voice. She picked at her food like she was afraid of doing it wrong. I'd ask Jessica to let Emily stay with me overnight sometimes. A granddaughter, sleep over. Jessica usually said no. She has to keep her routine. She doesn't sleep well away from home. Maybe another time. The few times she said yes, Emily would arrive at my apartment, and I'd see bruises sometimes. On her arms, her legs. She fell. Jessica would say, "She's clumsy." And I wanted to believe it, because the alternative was too terrible to consider. Michael noticed too. On his visits home, he'd watch Jessica with Emily and get this look on his face, concern mixed with horror. He'd ask me if I thought Emily was okay. I'd say yes, because I wanted it to be true. Because if I admitted she wasn't okay, then I'd have to do something about it. And I didn't know what to do. How many warning signs do you have to ignore before you're complicit? How many times can you choose peace over action before silence becomes betrayal? These are questions I'd have to answer soon. Questions that would haunt me for the rest of my life. November 2020. The world was in the grip of a pandemic. Schools were half closed. Everyone was isolated. Stress was high everywhere. Jessica had lost the part-time job she'd been barely holding on to. Emily was doing virtual school at home, which meant Jessica had to supervise her constantly. I'd call to check in. Jessica always sounded overwhelmed, exhausted, angry. Emily was being difficult, not listening, acting out. I'd offer to help, to take Emily for a few days to give Jessica a break. She'd always say no. Then came the Tuesday afternoon that split my life into before and after. Jessica called me. Her voice was strange, flat, defensive. "Mom, I need you to pick something up for me. Can you come over?" I said yes. Drove to her apartment. Let myself in with the key she'd given me years ago. The apartment was a mess. Dishes in the sink, laundry everywhere, the smell of something burnt in the air. And there, in the kitchen, was Emily, sitting on a chair, crying silently, tears streaming down her face. And Jessica stood behind her with electric clippers in her hand. Emily's beautiful golden hair she'd been growing for years, hair she loved to braid and put clips in, hair that fell past her shoulders in waves, was being cut off. Not cut, shaved, down to her scalp, in chunks, uneven, brutal. "What are you doing?" I heard my voice say. It sounded far away. Jessica didn't even look up. She wouldn't brush it. I told her 100 times. "So I'm fixing the problem." Emily's eyes met mine, and in that look I saw everything. The fear, the humiliation, the desperate hope that I'd do something, that I'd help her. I stood there. I watched Jessica finish. I watched my granddaughter's hair fall to the floor like pieces of her childhood dying. I watched her spirit break in real time. And I said nothing. When it was done, Emily looked like a prisoner, like a cancer patient, like someone being punished. Jessica seemed satisfied. There. No more arguments about brushing hair. I took the thing Jessica had called me over to pick up. I don't even remember what it was. I hugged Emily. Her small body was rigid in my arms. I whispered, "I love you," but the words felt empty, meaningless. I drove home, sat in my car in the parking lot, and something inside me finally broke. Not broke like shattered, broke like a dam breaking, like something that had been held back for too long finally flooding free. All those years of silence, all those moments I'd chosen peace over action, all those times I'd told myself it wasn't my business, it would work out, it was better not to interfere. I thought about my mother, how she'd stayed quiet when my father drank, how she'd endured, how she'd taught me that's what women did. We suffered silently. I thought about my marriage to Daniel, how I'd accepted distance and coldness because I was afraid of confrontation. I thought about every time I'd seen Emily shrinking, hurting, suffering, and I'd convinced myself it wasn't bad enough to act. And I thought about Emily's face, the hope in her eyes that died when I walked away. I was 62 years old. I'd spent my whole life being quiet, being easy, being the woman who didn't make waves. But some things matter more than peace. Some things are worth breaking silence for. Some things require you to become someone you've never been before. I went inside. I made a phone call, and then another, and another. By morning, I had a plan. By the next day, I'd acted on it. And 48 hours after I watched my granddaughter's hair fall to the floor, Emily was living with me, safe, protected, and I'd learned something crucial. I was stronger than I'd ever known. The morning after that terrible Tuesday, I called a family lawyer, explained what I'd seen, described the pattern of control, the isolation, the punishment. The lawyer listened, asked questions, and then said, "You could file for emergency custody." I was terrified. This was my daughter, my child. Calling the authorities on her felt like the ultimate betrayal. But every time I hesitated, I saw Emily's face. I heard the sound of those clippers. I remembered her silent tears. I made the call. By Thursday, I'd filed for emergency custody with the family court. I had documentation. Photos I'd taken of Emily's shaved head, text messages from Jessica complaining about Emily's behavior, statements from teachers who'd noticed Emily's anxiety, and withdrawal. I had my testimony about what I'd witnessed. Jessica was furious when she was served with papers. She called me screaming. How could I do this? I was destroying our family. I was turning on her when she needed me most. I was stealing her daughter. I let her yell. And then, for the first time in my life, I stood my ground. You hurt her, Jessica. You've been hurting her. And I won't be quiet about it anymore. I'm her mother. And I'm her grandmother. And I love her too much to watch you destroy her. The court hearing was fast. Emergency custody cases move quickly. A judge listened to my testimony, reviewed the evidence, spoke privately with Emily. Jessica was there with a court-appointed lawyer, angry and defiant. She denied everything, said Emily was difficult and needed firm discipline, said I was overreacting, said I was too old to take care of a child. The judge awarded me temporary custody. Emily would live with me while the case was investigated further. I'll never forget Emily's face when I picked her up from Jessica's apartment with a social worker present. Relief. Pure relief. She grabbed her stuffed animals and some clothes and practically ran to my car. That night, she slept in my spare bedroom, the one I'd kept ready for grandchild visits that rarely happened. She was scared, traumatized, but she was safe. The weeks that followed were hard. Emily had nightmares. She was anxious about everything. Would she have to go back? Was she in trouble? Was this her fault? I assured her over and over, "You're safe. You're not in trouble. This isn't your fault. You're staying with me." Jessica fought it. She hired a better lawyer. She claimed I'd manipulated the situation, that Emily was fine, that this was all a misunderstanding. But the court investigation uncovered more. Teachers reported concerning behavior. A pediatrician noted Emily's weight loss and anxiety. Neighbors confirmed they'd heard Jessica yelling. The permanent custody hearing happened 3 months later. The judge's decision was clear. I would retain custody. Jessica would have supervised visitation only, and she'd have to complete parenting classes and therapy before that could be reconsidered. Jessica hasn't spoken to me since. She comes to supervised visits with Emily, but she looks through me like I don't exist. Emily goes to these visits dutifully, but I can tell they're painful for her. She tries to please her mother, tries to be good enough, but it's never enough. Melissa has been my rock through all of this. She supported my decision from day one, helped me prepare for court, took time off work to be there for hearings. Michael flew home to testify about what he'd observed over the years. My family rallied around me and Emily in ways that strengthened us all. Emily is healing. Slowly. Her hair is growing back. She wants it long again, and I'll never deny her that. She's in therapy, working through her trauma with a kind professional who specializes in children. She's back in school in person now, making friends, laughing again. There's light in her eyes that wasn't there before. And I'm different too. At 63, I finally became the person I should have been all along. Not quiet Ruth, who keeps the peace. Not invisible Ruth, who swallows her words. But Ruth who stands up. Ruth who fights. Ruth who protects what matters most. Some people in my life don't understand. They think I should have tried to work it out privately, kept it in the family, given Jessica more chances. They think I was too harsh, too quick to involve the courts. They don't know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer, and finally reach the point where silence becomes complicity. I lost a daughter to gain a granddaughter's safety. That's a trade I'd make again, though it breaks my heart every single day. I pray Jessica will get help, will heal, will become the mother Emily deserves. I pray that someday she'll understand why I did what I did. But even if she never forgives me, I can live with that, because Emily is safe, and that matters more than anything else. I'm 63 years old now, and I've learned that strength isn't what I thought it was when I was young. It's not enduring in silence. It's not sacrificing yourself to keep everyone else comfortable. Real strength is knowing when silence becomes betrayal. It's choosing action even when action costs you everything. It's becoming the person the situation requires, even if that person is someone you've never been before. Emily is 10 now. She calls me abuela, and every morning when she comes into the kitchen for breakfast, I see more of the child she was meant to be emerging. She laughs easier now. She speaks her mind. She's learning that she's allowed to take up space, to have opinions, to make mistakes without being punished for being human. I look at her, and I think about all the generations of women in my family who stayed quiet. My grandmother, who endured an unfaithful husband. My mother, who worked herself to death, holding our family together. Me, accepting a distant marriage because I didn't know I could ask for more. Jessica, falling into patterns of control because that's what she'd learned. That cycle ended with me. With one phone call. With one decision to value a child's well-being over family peace. If you're reading this story, if you've made it this far and you're in a situation where you see something wrong but you're afraid to act, let me tell you this. Act anyway. The fear doesn't go away, but the regret of inaction is so much worse. Every day I wish I'd acted sooner, spoken up earlier, protected Emily before she suffered so much. But I can't change the past. I can only live with the knowledge that when I finally did act, I changed everything. Maybe you think you're too old to change, too set in your ways, too afraid of what people will think or how your family will react. I thought all those things too. I was wrong. It's never too late to become brave. It's never too late to use your voice. It's never too late to stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. I spent 62 years learning how to be silent. It took me one moment, one terrible, clarifying moment to learn how to be loud. And now, watching Emily grow into herself, watching her heal and thrive and become the person she was always meant to be, I know some silences need to be broken. Some peace isn't worth keeping. Some fights are worth having, no matter what they cost. I'm Ruth Alvarez. I'm a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and a fighter. And I wouldn't change a single thing about who I've become, even if it meant keeping what I lost. Because love, real love, isn't quiet. It's loud. It's fierce. It's willing to burn bridges and break hearts and stand alone if that's what it takes to protect the people who matter most. That's the lesson it took me a lifetime to learn. And that's the legacy I want to leave behind.